Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
You're
Appreciate it.
going to cut all that out?
I'm gonna have to,
Okay. Just a couple of things I want to go over. I thought we'd have a little fun to begin with. Um, the other day, I don't know if how many heard Pastor Jay's sermon over the weekend? And he mentioned, I thought it was very interesting. Um, bring this up.
Yeah. Pastor Rob.
Huh?
Pastor Rob.
Pastor
Said
Rob.
Pastor J.
What'd I say?
Pastor J.
Jay.
Oh, Pastor Rob. I did hear Pastor Jay a couple of weeks ago, though.
Yep.
Sorry about that, Pastor Rob. And one of these things that he did is he went over the genealogy of Jesus as mentioned in Matthew chapter 1. And he had mentioned that there were three periods of 14 generations each, beginning with Abraham. And I thought I would expand upon that a little bit because if you go to the Greek language, the original Greek, and you read that genealogy, I mean, if you want to do a genealogy like that, there's a couple of rules you have to follow. And I've got these outlined here. So it starts out, this is by a guy by the name of Chuck Missler, who has since gone to be with the Lord. I used to listen to him frequently. And he pointed this out. Hey, Chuck Missler was he was a graduate of the Naval Academy, and he was a scientist, a brilliant guy. So he's one that would always uncover these things. I don't know if he's the one that uncovered this or not, but the title of this article is "The Genealogy of Christ," and he says, try to create a fictitious genealogy. Just do it on your own. You can go to 24andMe or whatever it is, or 23andMe. This can be the genealogy of anyone, but there are a few rules. Okay? Again, this is based on not the English translations, but the original Greek language. This is the genealogy, begins with Abraham, down through David, ultimately ends up with Joseph. But number of words that you use in this genealogy must be divisible by 7. Everybody knows the number 7 is a number of perfection, often the number that's related to God on a spiritual level. So the number of words, and this is really what exists in the Greek iteration of the genealogy that Pastor Rob went over the other day. The number of words you use must be divisible by 7. Exactly. The number of letters you use must be divisible by 7. Exactly. The number of vowels must be divisible by 7. Exactly. The number of consonants must be divisible by 7. Exactly. The number of words that begin with a vowel must be divisible by 7. Exactly. And the number of words that begin with a consonant must be divisible by 7 exactly. So now if you have only one rule of the 6 we just mentioned, you have one chance in 7 of getting it right.
Now, shouldn't you have 7 points instead of just 6 points? I'm just teasing.
6. I see 6 points.
What is the issue? What's the purpose?
The purpose is if you read the genealogy as outlined in Matthew chapter 1, in the Greek, in the original Greek, each of these applies. The number, huh?
Why?
Why do you think?
We don't know.
The reason is that it had to be authored by God. There's just no way statistically that all of these rules could be complied with. You couldn't possibly put together something as precise as the language in Matthew chapter 1 and have the exact number of words divisible by 7 exactly, the number of letters divisible by 7. How could that be? It couldn't be unless it was being authored by God. Okay?
So what you're saying is this criteria has applied to.
It does apply. It is.
Does
Yeah,
apply.
it is
And
there.
because it does apply, man could not have done it.
Exactly.
Okay, now I get it.
So now if you have only one of these rules, you have a 1 in 7 chance of getting it right. If you have 2 rules, and you just do it by random chance, you have one chance in 49 of getting it right. But wait a minute, there's more rules.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The number of words that one occur more than once must be divisible by 7. Occur in more than one form must be divisible by 7. Occur in only one form must be divisible by 7. And just a few more rules to point out. The number of nouns has to be divisible by 7. Only 7 words shall not be nouns. The number of names shall be divisible by 7. Only 7 other kinds of nouns are permitted. The number of male names must be divisible by 7, and the number of generations divisible by 7. So this description of the genealogy of Jesus Christ is found in the first 11 verses of Matthew. Are found in the first, and all of this has to be in the Greek language, which is probably the most precise, rigid language ever written. And each letter has its own Greek alphanumeric number. There's even more. In the rest of Matthew 1, there are 161 words, and they also maintain a very elaborate structure underneath the text. So, how long would it take for this is where it gets into your question for someone to construct such a genealogy? Assume they'll work 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, and have 2 weeks off for Christmas. This will be 2,000 hours, man hours per week, or 120,000 minutes per year. That's working on the genealogy and applying all the rules. The 77777. Okay. The number of attempts needed, if this is randomized, would be 7 to the ninth power, or 79. That would be over 40 million attempts. So if a person was going to sit down and do this, it would take over 40 million attempts to get it right. Say it would have taken an average of 10 minutes to try one draft. That would be 403 million minutes. This little project would take about 3,000 years of work. This is laid out just to demonstrate that anyone who would say that the probability of this happening by statistical randomness is incredibly naive. Some scribe didn't sit down and go through these calculations to make sure that it happened this way. And these discoveries were made by Dr. Ivan Panin, and he is famous for this very thing. The heptadic, which is the number 7 structures underlying the biblical text. He was born in Russia in 1855, immigrated to the United States at an early age, and graduated from Harvard with a PhD in mathematics. In 1882, he became a Christian when he discovered uh, the heptadic structures of the text. He spent the remainder of his life, 50 years, generating 43 pages of discovery. Went on to be with the Lord in 1943. So these are fulfilled prophecies that he would be born of a virgin from Isaiah 7:14 and also from Genesis 3:15. And he was, as outlined in Matthew 1. That he'd be born in Bethlehem, Micah 5:2. Not only does it say he'd be born in Bethlehem, but Bethlehem Ephratah, I think is pronounced, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And the reason they said Bethlehem Ephratah is that there were 2 Bethlehems when Jesus was born. And he was. He would be taken into Egypt, Hosea 11:1, and he was. He would heal and make people whole, and he did. He'd be crucified, prophesied in Psalm 22. He would die for our sins, Isaiah 53, and he did. He would rise from the dead, Psalm 16:10, and he did. And there's countless, I think there's something like 300 Old Testament prophecies that have already been fulfilled. The statistical probability of Jesus or during Jesus' time of just 8 of these being fulfilled is like something like 1 to 10 in the 40th power. In other words, it's almost infinite. It's impossible for one person to have fulfilled or be the object of the fulfillment of so many prophecies recorded thousands of years before or hundreds of years before he was born. So that's the purpose. That's kind of a little fun exercise to think that this type of detail exists in the scriptures. So when we read that, and there's so many things like this, you can take them for what they're worth. But I think that that's pretty amazing. Improves the absolute supernatural nature of the Bible. And one other thing I was going to point out: if you go back to Genesis 5, and you find a genealogy there that begins with Adam. And again, take this for what it's worth, but male names in the Hebrew always have a meaning. They mean something specific. And so if you go and you look at Adam, his name in the Hebrew is man, which makes sense. He was the first man born. He gave birth to, or his son, first, second, actually his third son was Seth, which means appointed. Enosh came from Seth. His name was in the Hebrew mortal. Canaan means sorrow. And then the word but there is inserted. That's not part of it. But Mahalalel, his name means the blessed God. Jared shall come down. Enoch. So if you look to Genesis 5, you see each of these are listed in the order beginning with Adam. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death shall bring. Lamech means the despairing, and Noah means comfort and rest. Well, that's what they mean. So if we go down just and put all of those together, put those names, it's just from the For What It's Worth department, what we see is that man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. A little interesting tidbit, I thought, that you find this type of thing hidden in the text. And it's not numerology or trying to play fast and loose, but this is really, really stuff that's there. So I just thought that would be kind of interesting because,
That's not coincidental.
pardon me?
That's not coincidental.
No, that's the point. That is absolutely the point. Okay, so couple of articles. Any questions, comments? Anybody surprised at that?
Yep.
Yeah? Do you get it?
I did get it.
It took me a long time to get it, so kept reading it and saying, "What does all this mean?" and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Um, a couple of articles I wanted to go over. We keep talking, and I'm just going to kick this off, and I want to get into back into our look at the Abrahamic Covenant because that's such a vital piece of what we're going to change the date on this thing when we get to.
Yeah, you've gone past that already.
Yeah, no.
Do it after.
Okay. So at any rate, I want to get to a discussion about the Abrahamic Covenant. I hope to spend a little time talking about anti-Semitism because as we look around today and we see this explosion of anti-Semitism that's come onto the scene in such a short period of time, it's just why? Why is it happening? We have to ask ourselves.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere. You're exactly right. It's in our schools, and you got kids that are. I was just listening to I think Fox News on the radio tonight, and they were interviewing four uh, college kids, Jewish college kids, and one's going to MIT, and she's just saying, "Let me just get back to my studies. Let me learn to be a scientist. And I'm scared to death." And it's just it's amazing what's going on, and it's being fueled by our media. It's being fueled by propaganda. Things that you hear about Israel in the news are always false narratives. But we'll get more to that later. The other thing we've been spending a lot of time talking about what I believe is going to happen probably sooner than later, and again, I'm not setting dates. I don't know when. I don't know if it's 2024, 2025, maybe over a period of time, but the ultimate collapse of not just our economy, but the world's economy. And why is this important? It's important because it sets the stage for the one world economic system that's outlined in Revelation chapter 13 when Antichrist comes on the scene. And it's I think it's and when we talk about all these economic things and conditions that are happening and so forth, the only purpose, as I mentioned last week, is to tell us really how close we're getting, how fast things are coming together. Let's just take a look quick before we do this at Daniel chapter 7 and get a kind of an overview of where we're headed, what it's going to be like when Antichrist comes on the scene. And as I go through and discuss this topic tonight, this has a bunch of different meanings. But Daniel chapter 7, and we need to spend time looking at that because it's just an absolutely incredible series or incredible chapter. But beginning in verse 23, this is Daniel who's had this vision. And he's being told what the vision he had means. And of course, there's a lot that gets to this. But in verse 23, it says, He gave me being Daniel, this explanation of what he had a dream. And so he's now being told what the dream means. And we're now up to the fourth beast. Now, it's interesting that Daniel 7 refers to this coming series of kingdoms that will uh, rule the world, if you will. That that God Himself, this is a prophecy right from God, refers to these nations or empires as beasts. If we go back to chapter 2, we see the same outline of nations that will come in the future, but they're not referred to as beasts. So these human uh, empires, including the empire to come, from God's perspective, are beasts. And it's interesting that when we get to Revelation 13, we also see a reference to the beast, who is the Antichrist. And so it's the Antichrist who will come out from among the beasts that are yet to come. So God doesn't have a lot of regard for human institutions, for human governments, for human empires. And if you look back through the history books, world history, you can see a trail from one empire to another empire of uh, of evil. You know, certainly Egypt and the way they treated the Israelites, and then Babylon and how they conquered the world, and then the Mede Persians. Some good things came out of the Mede Persian Empire, but largely an evil empire. And the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, and then the Roman Empire, absolutely vile, and so on and so forth. So God doesn't have a lot of respect, and we know that the New Testament says that God's not a respecter of persons, which means He doesn't respect what people do. He respects their heart. So in verse 23, He gave me this explanation. We're now speaking of the fourth beast. Earlier, they had gone through the other three beasts, and the first beast was a reference to the Babylonian Empire. The second beast was a reference to the Mede Persian Empire. The third beast was the Greek Empire. And if you go back in history, you can see that's exactly what happened. Now, Daniel at this time was in the time of the Mede Persian Empire. And so he was familiar, obviously, with the Babylonian Empire because it was the Babylonians that took him and other Jews from Israel back to Babylon. And so he's familiar, had been up close and personal with Babylon, the Mede Persian, but he had not seen the Greek Empire. Later in chapter 8 and other places, we see literally hundreds of prophecies about these coming empires, which, because the book of Daniel is so full of of prophecies, many scholars for the longest time thought that they had to have been written, Daniel had to have been written after these things took place. But lo and behold, with the Dead Sea Scrolls and other evidence, it was determined that they were clearly, it was clearly written beforehand. So it's just one more proof of God's sovereignty. The fourth beast. This is a reference to the coming 10-member nation or 10 region nation, whatever you want to call it, that's coming on the earth. And I think relatively soon. We're now in this time period. We're now in the period or the dispensation when the church age that we're in right now will end. It'll end with the rapture, and then we're going to go into the final dispensation or period of history. But the fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling down and crushing it. Now, pay attention to that because this is the final kingdom that will be under the rule of Antichrist that has not yet occurred. And anybody that thinks that Antichrist is going to bring peace and safety, all you have to do is read this verse because it says that it will be different from all the others. And the others have been evil, but the one that's coming is evil beyond anything the world's ever experienced. The coming 10-member nation. So it will devour the whole earth. So this is going to be a global government. It's going to devour and control the entire earth. And when we see what's going on with the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and the Agenda 2030 and all these different things that are taking place, the intentional, I believe, demolition of our government by people. I mean, if we're not being intentionally destroyed from within, how is it that we have all of these males coming over the border? Thousands. Heard today that there were 10,000 that came over last night, and they came from places like Morocco in the Middle East and the Far East. They're not just coming from Central America. They're being allowed to come in, and they're released with a promise to appear at a later time, which we all know they never do. And so, why is this being allowed to happen? And I'm not sure I know what the answer is, but anybody with a modicum of common sense knows that this is not only happening, but it's destructive, but yet they'll tell us that our border is secure. Our border's not secure. Who could think that? But they want to tell us that. They keep telling us that. So it just demonstrates, as far as I'm concerned, the nefarious, deceitful, demonic time period we find ourselves in. And that goes on to say, so I'm sorry, verse 24, the 10 horns. So what's going to come is a world kingdom that will consider a world government that will consist of 10 parts. So there's going to be this 10-member nation, or this 10 kingdom that's going to kind of rule the whole earth. And you almost can picture certain leaders that will rise up. And I think what we see with things like I'm going to talk about in a moment with the BRICS movement, with the European Union, even some attempts to bring together the United States, Canada, Mexico, all of these efforts taking place behind the scenes. I think what we're going to see, this is just me, it may not be right, but most scholars, I think, agree that what we're probably going to see is a government consisting of 10 regions. That's where we're headed. And so out of that, it says that the 10 horns are the 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. So this final kingdom yet to come, there'll be 10 leaders, 10 regions, 10 nations, whatever you want to call it. And after them, a king will arise. So it puts in order what's got to happen. And we'll talk about the signing of the covenant and And what's going to happen is outlined in Daniel chapter 9. But this 10-member nation or this 10 kingdom, the 10 region kingdom has to be in place. And then once that's in place, out of it will come um, another king. This is in verse 24. Will arise. He's clearly the Antichrist. So you go back through history, there's never been a time when the entire world has been under the leadership of 10 leaders, out of which will come one leader, and that's going to be the Antichrist. So this 10 region empire has to be in place, out of which will come the Antichrist. And then it says that, and this is the nature of Antichrist. And it ties in with what we read in Isaiah 14.
Can I just, but don't we need apostasy first? Which is the rebellions before the lawless man comes?
Yeah, yeah, but
And
yeah,
we're not to
that's
that.
yeah. So in other words, what you're referring to is Second Thessalonians 2,
Right.
where it says that lawlessness and rebellion will reach a very high level. It's basically the Greek word for the rebellion is apostasia, which means apostasy, which means a falling away from faith. That concurrent, or one of the signs that is getting close, is just this tremendous falling away from faith. And then Antichrist will be revealed, but he can't be revealed until what? Until the restrainer
Right.
is removed at the rapture. The rapture, right now, we're the restraining. We're the restraining influence that's holding back what is going to come. I mean, what we're seeing today is abject evil, but it is nothing compared to what's going to happen after the rapture takes place. So the Holy Spirit, currently functioning through us and in us, the church, believers, all of us are part of the church. We all have been baptized in the Holy Spirit. So it says that Antichrist, can't be revealed until the restrainer is removed. So we, as believers, as Christians, will never know who the Antichrist is. Whether or not we're going to have the power to look down and know them, but he can't be revealed as long as we're here. And so what God is doing, and that's why we need to remember that God's totally in control and he's holding back. And you can see how God is currently holding back the full power yet to come. And why is he doing it? Because we're still here. Once we're gone, watch out. I mean, it's all chaos is going to break loose. So he will speak, and this is the nature of the Antichrist because he's going to be under the total influence of Satan himself. And we read in Isaiah 14 that Satan desires to be what? Like the Most High. He's jealous of God. And so he's going to totally control Antichrist. And during the second half of the tribulation, Antichrist is going to expect to be worshiped as though he's the Messiah.
How is
And
he
that's
going?
where the mark of the beast will come in. Because those that do not worship, or those that do worship him as though he's the Messiah, will be given a mark on their hand or their forehead. They will not be able to buy or sell without that mark. And so what we're seeing here with this crumbling world economy is setting the stage for the coming one world system.
How is he going to oppress the holy people of the Most High if God has removed us?
Because there's going to be, after we're gone, after the rapture, there's going to be a major revival. People will come to know Jesus Christ during the tribulation. It says in Revelation chapter 7, there'll be 144,000 Jews that will be sealed and protected. Their job is going to be to go out and witness. And it says multitudes from every nation, tongue, and tribe will accept Jesus Christ. That's the group that he's talking about. That's not the church. We're the church. We're the bride of Christ. Those people that accept him during the tribulation, it's great that they do, and we need to possibly. A lot of people believe, and I believe as well, leave little signs, little pieces of evidence, whether it's booklets or whatever, around, so that when we're gone, people can look and say, "Oh, that's what happened," or what was said about the rapture was true. What else could be the explanation? But yet, their fate, or what's going to come to them, they're going to get to the point where they're not going to be able to buy or sell. Bible talks about believers being beheaded in great numbers during the tribulation, but that's a different group. That's why it does say that here, and it also says in Revelation 13 that he will prevail against the saints. All right. Now remember, in Matthew 16, it says that he will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. All right. But yet it says here that he will prevail against the saints during the tribulation.
Isn't that two separate things? Because
It is.
the gates of hell will not prevail against God's church. In other words, God is going to have his bride.
Right. Right.
But those who come to know Christ after the tribulation, they're also his bride, are they not?
Well, they're not part of the bride per se. The bride, the church, the body of Christ is all distinguished, or all they're believers.
Right.
It's
And,
like the bride is going to be given robes that are bright and glorious.
and they're not going to be.
They're getting white robes. We're getting garments. They're getting robes. There's a they're just as saved as we are,
Yeah. So why would
but
they not be part of the bride of Christ?
because the bride is gone. The bride is gone. We are specifically the bride. We see that in First Thessalonians. We see that throughout the New Testament, that there is a time period for the bride. Now, that doesn't mean that people in the New Testament that come, or in the tribulation that come to know Christ, are not believers and not going to ultimately be part of the church. They will be. But as far as the distinction, it's really talking about two groups of believers: the church now, and then people that come to know Christ
And
later.
Rob, isn't the church though the Jews and the Gentiles?
Yeah, anybody that accepts Christ now, whether they're Jew or Gentile. Now, the thing of it is the Jewish people that make up the church are going to be less in number because they've been blinded to the truth in part. And if you ever try to witness to a Jewish person, you'll know what that means. Very difficult because their mind is so clouded, it's so blinded to the truth. They're blinders that God's put on. But you have the Amir Sephardi's and many born again Jews throughout the world that are part of the church, Jew and Gentile alike. And so that church, which is going to consist of Jews and Gentiles, will be removed at the rapture. And then Romans says all Israel will then be saved. So God's going to change his focus from the church to Israel. That's what the tribulation's all about, and to judge mankind. And during that period of time, multitudes will come to know Christ.
It's like the Jews that are here practicing. They're part of the church.
As long as they've accepted Christ, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Right. Right. As long as they've accepted Christ. Doesn't matter Jew or Gentile. But remember one very important thing, we've gone over this before. Jesus cannot return until they, who? The Jews, call upon him. Which, and we've said this over and over again, every Gentile on the face of the earth could accept Christ, but he can't come back until Israel as a nation accepts him and teaches. And there's a whole series of scriptures that get us to that.
So you're talking about the rapture return of Christ or the
Tribulation.
tribulation
Yeah.
return of Christ?
Right, right, right. So, other questions? So, what I wanted to do is to point out, and I kind of got off track there a little bit, but I think it's important to see that this kingdom to come, and like Ricky and I talk, we all talk all the time about how fast things are coming together. And when we talk about the collapse of the dollar, and we talk about the formation of these groups, and we've talked about debt and all these other things, it's almost a fait accompli that the economy is going to go. But that's only part of it. The stuff with Israel going on now, the anti-Semitism, which has just exploded out of nowhere, also is a part of it. With Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone, Zechariah chapter 12 is a part of it. The coming together of this one world system. Remember what Biden's campaign slogan was? Build back better. You know where that comes from? Right out of the World Economic Forum. It's code speak for a one world government. And so we'll get into that. I mean, I've got a lot of information, as you might imagine, on the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, and it's just all coming together. The stage is being set. The other thing that's, I think, a big contributor and a thing to watch out for is AI. We hear a lot today about artificial intelligence and how fast that's developing. If you think about the fact that Antichrist, when he comes on the scene, is going to have to be able to control every person on the face of the earth. But not enough people, he's going to have a lot of people supporting him, a lot of people in his camp, but there needs to be something more than just people doing a checklist. That's where the AI comes in. That's where we get all this stuff with the biometrics, with the eye scans, and all this other stuff that's just pointing to that time. And it's happening very, very quickly.
Well, I don't know if there's any um relevance or connection to prophecy or to the perfection sevens you were talking about earlier. But one example of AI that I read about just in the last couple of days is that, when we get to Mars, if we're here that long and we get to Mars, one of the biggest things we're going to need is oxygen. And they're saying now that AI will have the ability within 6 weeks to look at all of the natural resources, the basic, everything that's on the moon, to create oxygen from that. And that if humans were to try to do it, we couldn't do that in a lifetime with our current computers. There's so many calculations that need to be done.
Right.
Even AI can do that, and it's done some
Yeah.
similar things recently that are just. I'm not so worried with that, but
It was on the news yesterday morning. I heard that they're using using fake celebrities for to get people to buy into stuff.
Right.
One of them, I think, where they said they showed a picture of Tom Hanks. And
Yeah.
they created his artificially and using these celebrities to
Yeah. Oh,
get
yeah.
people into buying.
Oh, yeah. Right. It's all deception. It's all deception. And that's one of the things that Jesus warned about in the Olivet Discourse is be careful. That's the first thing he said when they asked him, what will be the signs of your return in the end of the age? As outlined in Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, what's known as the Olivet Discourse, he says, be sure that no one deceives you. And then in Second Thessalonians, it talks about a grand delusion that's coming. And I'll tell you what, this world is right now, it's under demonic power, unlike anything we've ever seen, delusion, evil. What else could be going on but the stage being set? And you go through Revelation and all the talk about demonic powers that are going to be, I'm sorry, tribulation, they're going to be unleashed during that period of time. And of course, we're not going to be here for that. None of the judgment part of the tribulation is meant for us. We're not, as we read in First Thessalonians 5, we, the church, the bride, are not appointed to wrath. And the wrath, of course, is just another word for the tribulation.
Now, what about the different trib views you have? pre, during, and post.
Yeah. I just do not go into all that right now if we don't have to.
Sure, I
But let me just
understand,
put it
but
this way, that if you read the Bible literally, the only conclusion you can come to is a pre-trib. Pre-trib. It's the only one. And you have to ask yourself, we're the bride of Christ. Do you think Jesus is going to beat up his bride? Doesn't make sense. So,
so then there's a difference between personal tribulations that we are
yes,
called to
yes,
go through
yes.
and the great tribulation.
Great point. Great point. Yes, absolutely. That is an excellent point. The Bible does say we'll go through tribulations, difficulties, and who knows what else. We all do. But not the direct article the, which precedes the day of the Lord, the wrath, the tribulation, the specific time period. Right. Different than tribulations. Good point. Okay, so real quick, um, everybody familiar with the BRIC organization or the BRICS group? Okay, what is BRICS? So BRICS is it's a group of nations that have come together, and it's an association. It's not a real economic union, but it's a group of nations coming together. In BRICS, BRICS consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These are five nations that have come together and formed what's called the BRICS. Now, there was a meeting, and you have, let me just back up. The purpose of BRICS is to form an economic conglomerate, if you will, where they trade between themselves oil, commodities, whatever it might be, in anything other than the dollar. And so the BRICS is already up and running, has been for some time. And in August, they had a meeting and added a number of other nations that will become a part of BRICS in January 1, 2024. And those nations consist of Iran, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, United Arab Republic, I think it is, Ethiopia, and Argentina. Five more nations that are going to become a part. So now it expands to 10 nations. And the Emirates have just announced within the last couple of weeks that they are going to trade and sell their oil, but they're not going to sell it using the dollar. So why is that important? If you go back to 1973, the United States came off the gold standard. In other words, back before 1973, in order to buy or sell anything, your dollars had to be backed by gold. So it was safe. But when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard in 73, they created what they called fiat currency. Fiat currency is just currency money that's just printed. There's nothing behind it. And one of the reasons that we have so much debt today, almost $34 trillion, is that we've been flooded with fiat dollars. It's nothing for the Fed just to sit back and start printing, pump it out into the system. Then all of a sudden you're faced with too many dollars chasing too few goods. The Fed has to come in to raise interest rates to curb inflation. Next thing you know, the Fed's between a rock and a hard place because interest rates are too high. What do? They have to lower rates. When they do, then they create high. It's a no-win situation. And so what's happened is that Henry Kissinger, who was uh, Nixon's Secretary of State, negotiated with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had all kinds of military equipment, but they didn't have the technology or the personnel to defend themselves. And of course, they've had this ongoing fear of Iran and so forth for a long time. And of course, Saudi Arabia, being at that time at least the world's largest exporter of oil, said that we would like you, United States, to protect us. To which Kissinger replied, "We'll do it. We'll be your first line of defense, but what we want you to do is to sell all your oil in dollars. So if a nation, say India, for example, wanted to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, they had to come to us and do what they call buy debt. In other words, to purchase dollars. We would loan them dollars. They had to have dollars. Every nation had to have a store of dollars so that they could buy, oil from Saudi Arabia. And so that's what became known as the petrodollar, which was great for us because every nation in the world was trading dollars. Well, what began to happen is that nations started to get wise. You had China and Russia and other nations saying that we no longer want to trade in dollars. We want a different currency. And so that's what's going on with BRICS. BRICS is going to begin to trade not just oil, not just natural gas, but all commodities in their own currencies, which has a tremendous impact on the United States. We're starting to see a run on our dollars. It gets very complicated. I can't say I can begin to understand it, but we sell debt by way of treasuries and bonds to other nations in exchange for a promise to pay pretty high interest rates at the end of a period of time. The world's losing confidence in us. Saudi Arabia really lost confidence in the United States when we pulled out of Afghanistan. Think about the agreement and that's just one factor, but think about the agreement that we have with Saudi Arabia to protect them from their enemies. And they watch and they see that we were protecting Afghanistan, keeping them basically afloat, and then all of a sudden we pull out. They're sitting there saying, this is going to happen to us. So what's the first thing that Saudi Arabia does? They begin to trade the yuan with China, China being the biggest purchaser of oil in the world. So now they're trading rather than China having to buy Saudi Arabian oil in dollars, they're buying it in the yuan, which is the Chinese currency. And so what we're seeing along with all these other things is the decline and the destruction of the dollar. And when that happens, and let me just point out one thing that what we're seeing as a result, I'm not going to go through all the BRIC stuff, but we're seeing dollars, investors, which are other countries and banks and so forth, are beginning to dump our dollar at record paces, record rates. They're dumping the dollar. They're flooding us, and when they dump the dollar, they send it back. And so now we talk about this flood of fiat currency on top of dollars being returned. It's like an accident waiting to happen. Now, again, I'm not an economist. I don't fully understand all this stuff, but BRICS being now the 10-member nation that they are, they're going to trade. And you think about it, you've got Argentina, one of the biggest suppliers of agricultural, or one of the biggest agricultural nations in the world. The United Emirates, one of the world's largest oil producing nations, 3.4 million barrels a day. You've got Saudi Arabia and Iran. So now you've got approximately 80% or 60%, whatever the number is, of the world's oil in this group. And you get into the Strait of Hormuz and all these other issues, and you can see how we could be choked off. And they can cause oil prices to skyrocket. And to say, well, we're not going to produce enough to sell the United States. Saudi Arabia is going to say, hey, we've got our own little group here. We're going to trade oil among ourselves. And so just one more thing, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on that, but one more thing. Why do I bring it up again? To demonstrate that we're moving ever closer to the time of Antichrist. And so if the tribulation is knocking at the door, and we believe in a pre-trib rapture, how close can it be? We live in very exciting times. And as we pointed out last week, not to be worried or frightened. Okay? Comments on it?
Is the dollars on the days holding up and get run over to
I heard that. Yeah.
So it's just, I mean, gold isn't really going up. When it's going up, it's showing you that's how much the dollar has down.
Right. Absolutely. I think next week I'm going to have to really, I'll probably not do anything on the economy, but next week really get into anti-Semitism and what we're seeing around the world because it's such a significant sign of the times. But I thought tonight, what we do in what little time we have left, another 15 minutes or so, is to continue. Last week, you remember, and hopefully you remember, we started to look at the covenant between God and Abraham. God, Abraham, and Abraham's descendants. And what we see here, and just as by way of a quick review, in Genesis chapter 12, we see that God called Abram from the Ur of the Chaldees and told him that move to a land I will show you. And so Abraham, known as one of the patriarchs, when we say patriarch, that's a reference to the forefathers of the Jewish people, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And in Genesis 12, we see that God called him for the purpose. Now, why did God call Abram? Well, the world at that time had become awash in paganism. And so rather than destroying the world or bringing judgment on the whole world, God had to decided in his sovereignty to start with a new people, a new nation. So at that point, there was no nation of Israel. So God says, leave your father's household and go to the nation, and I will, or go to the land I show you. And he says, I will make you, I'm in Genesis 12:2, into a great nation. Now, what does that mean? That he was going to, from Abraham and from Sarah, create this new group of people, this new nation. When we talk about nation, when it comes to Israel, it represents the people, the Jewish people, and the land of Israel. So God's going to create this new nation. And then he goes on to say, I will bless you, Abraham. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. And then, very significantly, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And so, this is a promise not just to Abraham, but to all of Abraham's descendants through Isaac, through Jacob, through Jacob's sons, ultimately to become the nation of Israel. So God's promising to do this. And what's interesting is that when this promise was first made, um, there were only two people. And God goes on to say um, later on that the number of your descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. And then if you go down to verse 6, well, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. These are promises not just to Abraham, but to all of his descendants. How do we know that? Because we repeated the same promises to Isaac, to Jacob, and we see it repeated throughout the Old Testament. So it's a specific promise to the people of Israel. And so here, when it says, I will bless those who bless you, anybody that blesses the nation of Israel, God says, I'll bless. Anybody who curses them, I will curse. And we've seen evidence of that throughout history. Empire, nation after nation that ceased to exist because of the treatment of Israel. The United States that prospered tremendously in the middle of the 20th century because of our blessing of Israel. But yet that's changed. And what are we seeing? We're seeing our country come unglued. We're seeing our country just fall apart, deteriorating, just coming together from the middle out. There, Joe likes to always say we're going to build it from the middle out. I'm saying we're destroying it from the middle out. And so I believe that at least in part, I think also the fact that as a nation that was founded on Christian principles, if you read sayings from many of our forefathers, Washington or Jefferson or John Law, the first Supreme Court uh, Chief Justice, and on and on and on, they all talked about the Bible. They all talked about Jesus Christ. Our first book, the first book used in schools was called a primer, and the primer contained Bible verses, and they taught kids Bible verses. And so God blessed us, I believe, because of that. But in the 50s, the 60s, we decided we no longer we no longer want God in the schools. We no longer want him in government. We kick him out of everything, and then add to that the treatment of Israel, and we're getting we're under God's curse, I believe, as is the whole world right now, because uh, well, there's not much Christian thought out there. In verse 6, Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Morah at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram. Now he's now in the land of Canaan, which ultimately becomes the land of Israel that God gave to Abraham and their descendants, not to the Palestinians. I defy you to read throughout the Old Testament, original Hebrew, or anywhere, and find the word Palestinian anywhere. You won't find it. So, uh, time the Canaanites were in the land, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring," that means Isaac, Jacob, Jacob's 12 sons, the people, the descendants, your descendants, I will give this land. And I had, I think, put up a picture of a map showing all the land that God gave to the Jewish people before, and now they just currently occupy a small piece. And then, if interesting that the place where Adam or that Abraham was standing when God said that to him was in what we today call, or the world likes to call, the West Bank, also known as Judea and Samaria. Um, so if you read back and go back to Acts, I think it's chapter 1, where Jesus tells his disciples to go out from Judea and Samaria to the four corners of the world, and I'm paraphrasing, and preach the gospel. He didn't say go out from the West Bank. He only said go out from Judea and Samaria. And so this is just one more propaganda data point for this whole idea of the West Bank. I'm not sure Christians should even use it. It's kind of hard not to, because it's so commonly used today, but it's just very pejorative, I think, word. Then we'll go over to chapter 13. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had departed him. So at this point in time, Abraham and Lot were together, and they went their separate ways in the land of Canaan. And then God said to him, "Look around from where you are, to the north, to the south, to the east, and the west. All the land that you see, I am giving, or will give, to you and your offspring forever."
Mhm,
That means all time, right?
mhm.
And so either God's a liar, because there are those that subscribe to what we know to be replacement theology that says the church has replaced Israel, that because of Israel's rebellion and failure to recognize their Messiah, that all these promises God made to Israel no longer apply. They now apply to the church. And it's something like 80% of the church today subscribes to replacement theology, which is why I believe so many pastors refuse to even talk about what happened on October 7th. I think an attachment to replacement theology there, which I consider, not that people that subscribe to replacement theology are not and cannot be believers. There are people in the church, but they're misguided, because it says right here, forever. So is God a liar? If he doesn't mean forever, what does he mean? I will make your offspring. So remember, this is at the time when there's only Abraham. There's no descendant yet. He doesn't even have Isaac in the picture. I will make your offspring like the dust. So that's a prophecy of what's going to happen. And today we have 7 million Jews living in Israel, all the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And guess what? This promise where it says, I will give you this land forever, is as relevant, it still applies today. God didn't change his mind. I didn't take away that promise. Then your offspring will go walk through the length and the breadth of it, for I am giving it to you. So Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre, again, in what the world calls the West Bank. Not the West Bank. I mean, think about it. Look at a map of Israel. It would have to be the East Bank, right? Because the border of Israel, as far as that territory is concerned, is to the east. It's west in terms of Jordan. It's the West Bank to Jordan. So why is it called the West Bank? Because the world tries to say that Jordan should control it, and that's long since gone by the board. Now they think that this group of so-called Palestinians should occupy, and we have our president saying that when this war is over, the only answer to the problem is a two-state solution. We need to carve out tiny little Israel and create a new state of Palestine. Never going to happen. The Israelites are never going to go for that. And it's a death knell. It's a kiss of death for Israel to even suggest that. It's never going to happen. But yet Blinken, Biden, and I'm not just saying it was the same with even Trump had uh, alluded to a two-state solution in some of the Abraham Accords. And certainly Obama started a lot of the stuff we're seeing now, and Bush, and it's been going, and Clinton, they all push for a two-state solution. In fact, if you go back to the Clinton administration, I think it was in 73 or 4, somewhere around there, they uh, they had what they called the Oslo Accords. And the Oslo Accords, remember, were signed by Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. And I think it occurred at Camp David. And the agreement was that, in fact, Israel would give up Gaza, East Jerusalem. They agreed to it, which is where the Temple Mount is. Made no sense whatsoever. And what the world calls the West Bank. Israel agreed to 95% of everything the so-called Palestinians had asked for. They shook hands, but Arafat refused to sign it. He gave a speech later on, shortly thereafter, after that meeting in South Africa, and said that I consider that treaty to be the same as the Peace of Saladan or the Hunda. I may be pronouncing this word wrong, but it goes back to the time of Muhammad, when Muhammad entered into a 10-year treaty with the people of Mecca that he would not invade them. And then after he got strong enough, 2 years into this treaty, he attacked Mecca. And so Arafat said that my agreement, my handshake, which I didn't sign, even though they offered us 95%, was the same as that. If you look at read into Islam, into the Quran, it calls for deception. It says deception's okay. And so that's what Arafat basically said, is that I am not really agreeing to this, even though they're offering me 95%. So what does that say? They're not interested in a two-state solution because that's what that would have done. They want it all. And that's what we hear these Palestinian supporters shouting today. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That's the whole thing. They're not interested. It's not a two-state solution as far as they're concerned. They want all the Jews driven out. And when and if that ever were to happen, that means not one Jew is allowed to live there. But we go back to Amos chapter 9, verse 15, where it says, in no uncertain term, God says, when I bring them back to the land a second time, which is what this is, they've been coming back since 1948, the second time, the first time when they came back from Babylonian captivity. So they're coming back now for the second time of being dispersed. He says, Never again will they be dispersed. Never again will they lose control of this land. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And so we're seeing a lot of propaganda. So um, God, I think last week we read, and I'll finish on this, Deuteronomy chapter 7, which is where we get the term God's chosen people. God has a purpose for the Jewish people. Go back to Genesis 12. The most important of all the promises is the last one in Genesis 12:3, where he says, "Whoever curses you, I will curse." And then goes on to say, "All peoples meaning Jews, Gentiles, everybody on the face of the earth, will be blessed through you." So what does that mean? That means through the lineage beginning with Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob, down through Judah, David, all the way through up to and including uh, uh, Mary and Joseph came the Messiah. He is the person that is referred. That's what it meant when all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. It's through the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that Jesus came. Jesus was a Jew. We know that. He was a Jew. And so, because of this promise that God made to Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our Messiah came through that lineage. And guess what? We read in Romans chapter 11 and other places that we as Gentiles are grafted into these promises. We're a part. We can partake in that root, which is the shed blood of Jesus Christ. But it's only because God created this great nation. And so you got the world and all of these these uh, college uh, scholars and whatever else you call them, professors and different people and people from the in Congress, the squad members and all of these people that are trying to say that Israel's getting exactly what they deserve. Man, just look at what happened on the 7th of October. And then listen to some of the accounts of what happened to those poor hostages. And I just read today for the first time, you may have heard this, that when they were getting in those ambulances and being carted away, they were all drugged up, which is why they look peaceful and happy. And all a facade. And some of the stories coming out, little kids branded with red hot tailpipes that they were drugged, and kids, young kids that were hostages being forced to watch videos of what happened on the 7th. The post-traumatic problems that these people are experiencing is never going to leave them. And who knows what's happened to the rest of them? The Hamas doesn't want to release the women because they don't want the world to know what they've done to them. I don't know if you've heard some of the accounts. I don't even want to think about it, but they're horrific. But yet, the world likes to say that Israel got what it deserved, that they are an apartheid state. Apartheid means that no other group of people are allowed to live there, to be a part of their culture. Well, if that's true, why is it that 20% of the population in Israel proper are Arabs and they're allowed to sit in the Knesset? They're allowed to be voted into office. They have representation in the government. And those Arabs that live in Israel proper wouldn't have it any other way. They don't want to go living in Gaza. They don't want the Palestinian Authority to take over, but yet God prophesied that all of this was going to take place. And so all of these things, it's a confluence of so many things coming together at one time. I'm not sure we're going to be here this time next year. I'm not setting dates, but things are happening so fast that I think the only reason, as Billy Graham once said, and I'll finish with this, and I've known mentioned it before. If God doesn't judge the United States, he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology.
Mhm.
So that's where we are. Yeah. Questions, comments? Hopefully it's all coming together. I just think it's fascinating that, You can read what you can read in Genesis and see it confirmed in other parts of the Bible, and how it's just an integrated message system. And not only that, but it contains other evidence of the divine inspiration that went into it, like all the sevens. You may shrug that off, but that's just, you can't make that stuff up. It can't happen.
No, it's interesting. I love across the street and what how we do it. The next one is Muslim. Right? I mean, the Muslim had that sign, Free Palestine and something like that. And it's interesting because they had it maybe for a couple of weeks. It's gone now. So I don't know if anything transpired or what. But
Somebody probably stole it.
very interesting how I live right across the street from that those two,
That's amazing. Did they get along?
different car.
But they people.
I don't know because the Jewish people they keep to themselves, and the Muslim guy is really very friendly when he talks to everybody.
Mhm.
But I've never seen them talk.
Yeah. Who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah. Who knows?
You know,
I've lived in American midwife for that's one thing. And, we hear the occasional anti-Semitism event someplace involving one or two people or something. But in my whole life, very rarely. Where is this anti-Semitism in the last 6 weeks coming?
I know.
How could it have been?
I think it's always been there. Now they just have an excuse.
Media.
Yeah.
Always been there. We don't get
Yeah.
There have been millions of dollars put into this, like George Soros is putting millions of dollars into groups
Right.
to go around and stir this up.
Well, not only that, but you have social media. China, Russia, they're just feeding social media with anti-Semitic hate.
So it's organic and grassroots.
Yeah.
But the colleges have been reading this.
Yeah. Right.
I think you're right. But what I also think that says is that we must be a country full of brain dead people, very dimwits, to fall for this.
You know what it is? It's so counterintuitive what we're seeing, that the only explanation is that it has to be demonic. Remember, Satan has every reason to turn people away from the Jewish people. If he could wipe them out, his day would be complete, which is not going to happen.
He also tries to get us focused on things. So we're not focused on the Lord and we have all this.
Well, that's true, yeah.
So, so we
Yeah.
have to be careful to stay grounded
Right.
and not let it
Yeah.
impact us.
On the other hand, God is omnipresent, but Satan isn't.
Right.
He must have been a busy guy the last 6 weeks.
He's got demons all over the place.
Yes, he's got his minions.
Yeah, he's got his minions. So, Father, we just thank you for this time. And Lord, we're just so thankful that because of us and our brothers and sisters around the world, that you're restraining Satan's full power. And Lord, for those that don't yet know you, we pray, Father, that that we need to bring people to Jesus and Jesus to people, and just make that our total, complete focus, because there's not much time left, and what lies ahead for those that are left behind, even though they can still come to know you, and that'll be glorious. It'll be a major revival during that time, but there's no need for anybody to be left behind and to have to go through the torture that lies ahead during the tribulation. I pray for everyone here, Lord. I pray for our friends and neighbors and relatives that don't know you, and ask, Lord, that you give us the wisdom, give us the opportunity to be able to share you with everybody that we possibly can. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.